Greetings ladies and gentlemen, and welcome for another Curse of Naxxramas video. Now the adventure mode is coming out today, so I don't know exactly what time that's gonna be, but in the meantime I will be covering some more of the cards that they did reveal. There's gonna be 4 more of them, I believe, that I will be touching upon, although I am tempted to maybe take my sweet time with some of those because they are in fact very interesting. So the first one we're going to be looking at is I think the most uninteresting one of them all is the Stone Skin Gargoyle. I don't know how to put it. Her ability is something that we'd been thinking about. I remember theory crafting back when me and Jodo were kind of talking about new cards that could come into the game. We were talking about a bramble wall, right? Some kind of druid minion that could not attack, and whenever it took damage, it was going to heal itself at the end of the turn. Instead, what we have is a minion that can attack, but heals itself at the start of your turn. So you have kind of a downside there. I thought it would have been more interesting to have a wall minion, something that could not attack. That might come down the line. I'm currently on the EU server, so I cannot really compare it to necessarily every single card in the game. But what I'll be comparing it to is the obvious, there are 2 other minions that share these stats. So let's look at Silverbad. Silverbad Patriarch. You all know this little bad guy, 3 mana, 1/4 with taunt. He's a beast, so he's got at least that going for him. Stone Skin Gargoyle doesn't. And the other card I think is even more comparable to the Stone Skin Gargoyle in that it has a trigger that also triggers at the beginning of a turn is the Demolisher. I don't even know if I have one. Yeah, I do. So Demolisher, at the start of your turn, deal 2 damage to a random enemy. Demolisher rarely sees the light of a second turn because when you play him, the opponent goes, uh-oh, this is going to be too much value. If I let it pew something, like it kills a 3-2 with just an extra kind of bomb throw. I can't allow that, so they typically kill the Demolisher right away. Stone Skin Gargoyle doesn't even have that going for it. It's unlikely to actually give you the Demolisher-like value, whereby Demolisher could kill something at the start of your turn. Stone Skin Gargoyle just kind of heals itself. So the turn comes into play, it can't attack, doesn't have charge, so you're not going to have immediate value out of it, and you're not even going to have delayed value out of the Stone Skin Gargoyle because it's typically going to just die without seeing the light of your next turn. It's a card I'm not too sure about design-wise. I mean, it's like a mix between Demolisher and Silverbad in that it has the same weaknesses as the Silverback Patriarch and none of the strength of the Demolisher. So there are some things you can do with the Stone Skin Gargoyle, obviously. Any buffs that contribute to increasing its health and power will make it better. So, as a paladin, if you have like a Blessing of Kings, that can always be pretty nice. If you've got anything that'll take, advantage of the fact that it has low health, the fact that it's gonna heal itself, like a Northshire Cleric, for instance, that's been confirmed by Blizzard as functioning like a heal. Apparently I don't have the card. Is there a way to show it? Northshire Cleric? Oh, I mistyped it, never mind. Herder. Alright, so Northshire Cleric. Whenever the Stone Skin Gargoyle heals itself, it will trigger the Cleric. And if you have an Alchemized Soul Priest, it will kill the Gargoyle, for all you might care. I don't know if there's ever a time where you'd like to have the Stone Skin Gargoyle die, but there's a possibility that you might want to, so that would allow it to trigger. So you could play Northshire Cleric and Stone Skin Gargoyle and get yourself some extra cards, because in the early game, as a priest, what could happen is the opponent sees Northshire Cleric, he wants to remove it as soon as possible, because it's kind of a big threat if it snowballs into many cards. But the thing is, with the Stone Skin and the Northshire, he'll have to pick a target. If the Stone Skin stays alive, maybe you're going to be putting down, I don't know, a buff on it, whatever it is, like a Shattered Sun Cleric, make it a 2/5, it's actually becoming somewhat interesting at that point, because it doesn't die nearly as readily. So I feel like Stone Skin Gargoyle is at best situational, at worst unplayable. That's how bad I feel it is, and I feel like it's a gimmick card, if anything, in Arena. I have been thinking about Mark of the Wild and Mark of Nature being somewhat usable on it. Blessing of Kings is probably, in my mind, the best one. Getting a 5/9, a 5/8, sorry, would be absolutely amazing if it healed itself every single turn. So if you can get a nice curve with Stone Skin into, I don't know, Divine Shield plus Kings on it, that could be very interesting, but as it is, it really feels gimmicky. A really good play as a druid, and this is gonna, Innervate enables a lot of things for druids. So if you're thinking, turn 1 Innervate, you don't need the coin. You can be the first player with that. Innervate, turn 1 Stone Skin, turn 2 Mark of the Wild. You got a 3/6 with taunt that heals itself. Well played, ladies and gents. It's like having Ascension Shieldmaster on turn 2, better than that even, that heals itself. How the hell do you stop that? It does require 3 cards. It is vulnerable to Shadow Word Pain. It will trade against 2/3/2s, but if it stays up, there is very little you can do to stop it. It's obviously not nearly as good as, for instance, the Echoing Ooze that we saw yesterday. I talked about the Echoing Ooze in the previous video. You know, I'd rather get Echoing Ooze, Innervate, Mark of the Wild. 2/3/4s with Taunt probably are better than Stone Skin, but it is still a decent card to combo off of, you know, a nice Innervate start. So I'm not sure if that's going to see play ever, but it would be interesting to at least try out maybe an Innervate combo-ish aggro, okay, so low-cost Druid, with Marks of the Wild and good minions that can synergize with it. So you flood the board with a bunch of crap, you got Power of the Wild, you can get some cards that draw you, like Gnomish Inventors, you can play Loot Hoarders in the Death Rattle deck, you can play Undertaker, so you can play some kind of tempo Druid deck with Savage Roars, where the goal is to establish some kind of tempo. A tempo Druid is something that's barely ever been seen because it tends to run out of steam at some point, but if you run enough card draw, there's a possibility that you can make that work. So I'd be curious to see if Stone Skin makes its way in any Druid deck. So much for not having much to say about a specific card that looks like it's absolute crap, but I do feel like it's very, very lackluster in general. I don't know that I would like playing it all that much. Yeah, it's kind of, I don't know, it just feels like, yeah, where's Demolisher? It feels like that unless you combo it with something. So, and combos, you know, in Hearthstone are very hard to pull off unless you get, you know, the perfect starting hand. So it's very, very difficult to justify. Now, is there anything else in this? I mean, in this specific, like for that specific card, I can't think of anything else that I'd like to do with that. I mean, I guess a Flame Tongue Totem could be nice in a Shaman deck. If you got a Flame Tongue Totem, the Stone Skin Gargoyle, you can get some pretty damn decent value. It's a 3/4 that heals itself in Shaman with the Healing Totem on top that can basically make sure that it survives the end of the turn and then heals itself back up to full health. So that could be somewhat interesting, but overall, not overly impressed. Not overly impressed. Although, Definitive Argus says, hello, baby. Next card up is a complete bomb, a metagame changer, metagame breaker, and the other one after that as well. This one is going to make you want to run it twice in every deck you ever run. Yesterday we saw, and I will go back over it, the Unstable Gold. You know, I said, you know, this is a good anti-aggro card. I was like, yeah, it's a good 2-drop, a 1/3 with Taunt, a Throttle, 1 damage to all minions. Okay. Prepare yourselves for the advent of the Death Lord. What? 3 for a 2/8 with Taunt? Did anybody say OP? I don't know. I'm just gonna leave that here, but this card is absolutely freaking nuts. Now, you know, we have something that looks a bit like it. You have Mogashan Warden, obviously. It's a 4 mana 1/7 with Taunt. This one costs 1 less mana, has 1 more attack, and 1 more health. There is a drawback. When it dies, the opponent puts a minion from their deck into the battlefield. It is a drawback, and at the same time, it also can be, I would say abused, but kind of taken advantage of, because if the opponent, let's say the opponent is playing, it's obviously an anti-aggro card, so let's assume the opponent is playing the, an aggro warlock deck, something you'll see all over the place. Aggro warlock is being played, the opponent has his flame imps and his knife jugglers and whatnot. Death Lord will typically at least trade for 2 for 1. Death Lord will at worst eat up, I don't know, Flame Imp plus Abusive Sergeant plus another 3/2. At worst, that's what the Death Lord will do. And then they put a minion from their deck into the battlefield. Not that big of a deal if they're aggro, because they're gonna statistically likely get something small instead. I mean, they could get a Doom Guard, but the odds of it happening are actually fairly slim. So statistically, you're gonna be pulling ahead of Zoo with a card like Death Lord. But the good thing is, if it's your turn and you're the one sacrificing the Death Lord, for instance, it's got 2 health left, and you decide to sacrifice the Death Lord into whatever the opponent has, you can always, you know, respond to whatever comes down. If it's a Doom Guard that comes out, oh, maybe you got a Siphon Soul or something. So there are ways to make the Death Lord's kind of drawback play in your favor by sacrificing it on your own turn to get time to respond to the opponent. And the good thing is that it doesn't copy a minion from the opponent's deck, it literally takes it from the opponent's deck. So it removes a card from their deck in effect. Now obviously, you know, the good thing about this is that if they have, you know, a minion with a really interesting battle cry, let's say, you know, Gnomish Inventor, they have a Gnomish Inventor in their deck, for whatever reason. What is this, that joke? Oh, there it is. Alright, so they have a Gnomish Inventor, let's assume they have one. if your Death Lord puts it into play, you deny them the card draw. If it puts it in Azure Drake, you're denying them the card draw. Whatever you put into play, like you're playing Miracle Rogue, this dies for whatever reason, you get a Leroy Jenkins into play, they lose the game because you can't respond to 2 health immediately, at least most of the time. So the good thing about the Death Lord is exactly that, it gives you time to respond if you sacrifice it on your own turn. And I feel like as much of a drawback as it might be against mid-range decks, like if you're facing, I don't know, a Shaman or something, if you put down a Flame Tongue, you get to respond to it. If you give them, I don't know, you give them a Fire Elemental without the Battle Cry, you're already in a good situation. Worst case scenario, you give them something like, I don't know, Ragnaros. Maybe you play, you know, Shadow or Death or BGH. Maybe you play Faceless Manipulator. If you have time to respond, you're in a 6 spot. However, if it's their turn and they're getting the initiative off of whatever card you give them, that could be a problem. So it really depends on what they get. Like, for instance, Druids, if they have a Keeper of the Grove, how do I not have that yet? Alright, so let's assume they have a Keeper of the Grove in their deck, or Druid of the Claw. By having the Death Lord, the Druid of the Claw comes in as a 4/4 naked body. Ergo, it doesn't have +2 health and taunt, or charge. It has neither of those. Although, you know, it's the exact same thing as they'd gotten it with charge, because once their turn comes around, then they could get it. But if they kill your Death Lord on their turn, they get a Druid of the Claw, it doesn't have charge. They can't attack with it. Keeper of the Grove, Battle Cry denied. Same is true of other Battle Cries that you want to deny. So I feel like Death Lord is going to be a very heavy metagame card, the same way that, you know, I was talking about yesterday about the, what was the name of it? The Nerebar Weblord, I believe. Yeah, that's the one. Nerebar Weblord. Very situational metagame heavy card, whereby it'll fit a certain metagame, you'll shove it in your deck. I feel like Nerebar Weblord and Death Lord are also, you know, they're both metagame cards, but Death Lord is a lot more versatile, than the Weblord. It's insane how good it is. It's absolutely insane, and it's also, you know, kind of fitting for some kind of Randuin version of whatever I want to do. I mean, I've been having trouble with Zoo and Randuin, so that might just be an answer. It does put something at random into play. It does put something at random into play. So Death Lord, metagame breaker, number 1. The number two, the Spectral Knight. Can't be targeted by spell or hero powers. The only other card with this ability that is not, you know, coming from Ysera. Ysera can give you a Laughing Sister, which is a 3/5 for 3 mana that has the exact same ability. But in this case, Fairy Dragon is a 3/2 for 2. And the Spectral Knight is a 4/6 for 5. What 4/6s for 5 do you know of? I know of 2. I know Spiteful Smith, which is a weapon-oriented, you know, 4/6 for 5 mana, so Spiteful Smith, and Druid of the Claw, which is a 4/6 for 5, Druid specific, that requires a kind of Battle Cry-ish activation. So if you deny it through the use of the Death Lord, like I mentioned, then that's not going to be a problem. So Spiteful Smith is the only direct comparison to Spectral Knight, and I would argue that the closest competitor to the Spectral Knight as far as its effect is the Stranglethorn Tiger. Not in terms of stats. In stats, Spiteful Smith comes very close, very situational, can only be used in weapon decks. If you don't have a weapon equipped, it's not going to be nearly as good. Has seen play in certain warrior decks, has seen play in certain rogue tempo decks, you'll see 1 of or 2 ofs. In certain older tempo decks in a very mid-range oriented metagame with Assassin's Blade, you'll see Spiteful Smith being used, but Spectral Knight is useful across the board. It's a Druid of the Claw for every class. It's also, you know, the closest thing, the reason I find it so similar to the Stranglethorn Tiger is that the Stranglethorn Tiger has stealth, cannot be targeted the turn it comes into play. Now, obviously, the Spectral Knight can never be targeted by spells or hero powers, which arguably makes him a little more reliable as far as anti-removal goes than the Stranglethorn Tiger. Downside, it can't kill Yetis, it can't kill Sentient Shield Masters, unlike the Stranglethorn, which can most definitely and easily do that. Also, Stranglethorn can get buffed up by Houndmasters, has seen play in some Priest mid-range decks, has seen play in some Druid mid-range decks, has seen play in Hunter mid-range for sure. Stranglethorn Tiger was there. Spectral Knight, however, fits every single possible mid-range deck you'll ever build. Like, it doesn't matter which deck you're building. This guy is just a Yeti. You're getting Yeti-like stats. Look at that, you're getting like the Chillwind Yeti, you all know the Chillwind Yeti? You're all getting a Chillwind Yeti for 1 more mana, and you smack 1 more health on top of it, and the can't be targeted by spells or hero powers ability. Now, the cool thing about that is that if you compare this directly, for instance, if you compare the Fairy Dragon, right? Fairy Dragon with a Bloodfen Raptor, they both have the same stats. Fairy Dragon is not a beast, ergo it doesn't benefit from the, I mean, vanilla 3-2, the basic vanilla 3-2 is the Stranglethorn, the Bloodfen Raptor, and the Fairy Dragon says you won't even pay more mana and you're gonna get the same stats plus the nice ability on top. So, you know, the Fairy Dragon beats the vanilla test by far, but Spectral Knight you have to pay 1 more mana for the same ability, but you get an extra bit of help. So not only are you getting the Fairy Dragon-like ability, which in theory is free, so to speak, quote-unquote free, since you don't pay more than the Blood Raptor to get that on the Fairy, but you're also getting 1 extra health, which is actually a really big deal, because how many 6-attack minions do you know of in the game? There are very few of them outside of like Ventricle, Mercenary at that point in the game. Ventricle is pretty much one of the only ones. I mean, Stalag and Fugan, now that we have a new one with the... I'll talk about the minion that in the next video, but Stalag and Fugan definitely does that. Spectral Knight is unremovable, cannot be Fireballed, cannot be Swiped, cannot be Wrathed, cannot be Hexed, cannot be Polymorphed. Mages will be looking at Spectral Knight and they will be feeling like priests have been feeling when they've been facing down Yetis all their lives. Every single player now knows what it's like to actually be a priest. Now, at least for one game, because that Spectral Knight is a complete mid-range bomb. It typically trades 2 for 1 at least against minions. It will generally get you that, at least a 1 for 1, if not a 2 for 1. You will not be eating removal for it, but that's no problem. Generally speaking, you know, you might have a Yeti curve on turn 4 and turn 5 Spectral Knight. Like, it's been a problem for, you know, for a lot of mid-range decks to get that nice 5-drop, but we're getting really nice 5-drops. The following card is also a sick 5-drop. What we used to have for 5-drops that were largely used in decks was basically Azure Drake, to a large extent. That was the only one that was played, and Stranglethorn Tiger did see some play. At times. I don't have him here, but you know, it's in there. So Stranglethorn Tiger did see play at times, and as an anti-aggro, you know, kind of metagame card, you did see the Kodo being played, which I would suspect might come back in, you know, with a force in Naxxramas, because a lot of aggro decks are probably going to be coming around, and there exist some cards. I mean, a lot of the cards that were revealed from Nax are 2 attack or less, so this guy could definitely get you some sick value. Although you will be triggering death rattles with it, it is still quite potent. So I wouldn't doubt if we saw the 5, you know, the 5 mana curve being a highly contested slot nowadays in decks, which was not the case before. You had very limited amounts of choices, and people typically went with the safer Azure Drake over anything else, especially for classes that had the 5-drop. I mean, that had spells in their decks. Azure Drake was always systematically good. So I'm not sure if we'll see Abomination being played, because a lot of people might be running silences, you know, as a kind of metagame response. So I'm curious to see if that's going to prop up. But it could be a really nice response to a very aggressive metagame. I think A-Bomb could be sick for that, but we'll see exactly how that ends up happening. So Spectral Knight, 5-drop for every class, sick. Jure the Claw for everyone. Everybody hide yourselves.
Joined your channel.
Hide your kids, hide your wives. So Belcher is the Sludge Belcher is the next card on our list here for 5-drops. You have a 3/5 for 5 mana, so you're thinking, you know, Senjin Shieldmaster as far as stats go. It's the closest comparison. The closest comparison is the Senjin Shieldmaster. You get a 3/5 with Taunt for 5 mana instead of 4, but you pay 1 more mana to get yourself a 1/2 Slime with Taunt, which is the exact same thing as a Goldshire Footman. Goldshire Footman being a 1/2 with Taunt. So you lose a Sludge Belcher, you lose a Senjin, and you get a Goldshire Footman. Badass. Now the reason this is good is because the 3/5 with the body is pretty decent against aggro, but it also works against other mid-range decks that might have a Wombo, Combo, Dumbo, Trombo, right? If they go like Force of Nature, Savage Skill, and they just ram it into Sludge Belcher, you know, they ram their hero plus a Treant into Sludge Belcher to kill it, they still have to deal with the stupid 1/2 with Taunt that will aggravate them beyond belief. So the Sludge Belcher is good against combo decks. It will stop a Leroy in his tracks. The only downside is that it gets sapped if you're facing Miracle, which really, I don't know if Miracle is going to be played nearly as much post Naxxramas, but something along its lines might crop up. As a nice addition, I feel like the Sludge Belcher will be, you know, I feel like it's obsoleting, for constructed purposes, I feel like it's obsoleting the Fen Creeper. This is this is kind of a gripe that I have. You know, I did talk about that in the past. My fear of obsolescence, my fear of a power creep occurring. For those of you who don't know what a power creep is, it's when new cards are released that are objectively better than previous cards. Here, you can't say that the Sludge Belcher is objectively better than the Fen Creeper, because it is not a 3/6. If it were a 3/6, then you could say it's objectively better. But right now, it can be sounced off, and it'll be, you know, worse than the Fen Creeper. But that's the kind of only situation where that's the case. What does end up happening a lot of time, though, is that in Arena, and I'm happy it did that, because that kind of counteract the power creep effect that I was afraid of with the Sludge Belcher. If it were a common in Arena, you would never, probably never, pick a Fen Creeper over a Sludge Belcher. It would be a very rare occurrence that you would do so, because very few things hit for 5 that don't hit for 6, and that you'd rather, you know, get a Fen Creeper over a Sludge Belcher. It's so rare. It's so rare that that will happen in Arena. So I'm happy that they modified the rarity versions. The rarity levels rather, so that they're not competing for the same slot in an arena format. But in constructed, I mean, Fen Creeper was already largely unplayed because it was not reliable enough. People would, if they were gonna play a Fen Creeper, most people generally opted for another 5-drop like Azure Drake, Stranglethorn Tiger, because you might as well get a 5/5 without taunt that anyway forces a response. You might as well get that than a Fen Creeper, which is a worse, like an objectively worse Druid of the Claw. The only time where Fen Creeper is not objectively worse than Druid of the Claw is when a battle cry effect is denied through, for instance, the, you know, if it gets summoned into play through the Death Lord or an Alarm of Bot or something, and you don't get to use the Choose One ability, then the Fen Creeper is not objectively worse. What Blizzard would have had to do for the Druid of the Claw to be objectively not better than the Fen Creeper would have been to make the +2 health and taunt buff silenceable, which is not the case. At the moment it can get silenced off, but it'll keep the extra 2 health. So I don't know if that's intended at all, the same way that, you know, the Ancient of War is not objectively, I mean, it's a 5/5 if it gets silenced off instead of a 5/10. So I don't know if that's intended, but Fen Creeper is looking worse and worse by the minute. So I don't know if they'll ever, you know, address that. I don't think they will. I mean, it's a balanced card, especially for Arena. It's a winning card in Arena, I'd say even. But Sludge Belcher kind of, you know, puts it to shame. Sludge Belcher is like a mix. If Goldshire Footman, Stendian Shieldmaster, and Harvest Golem had a baby, it would be a Sludge Belcher. And I think I really, really like this card. I am a big fan of it. I feel like it fits a role against multiple archetypes. It's not just good against aggro, although it is also good against other mid-range decks that might combo you down. So, you know, the 1/2 might not seem like a big deal, but if you've ever played, I mean, some games against Shaman, for instance, come down to a Stoneclaw Totem. That's basically what you're getting, but better, off of that Death Rattle. So, I wouldn't whine about that. I wouldn't whine about that. It's always pretty damn solid. And you also, you know, if you're the one who's losing the Sludge Belcher intentionally and smacking into something, you are getting a 1/2, which is summon, which might trigger something like a Knife Juggler, for instance, if you're playing this in some kind of zoo deck for whatever reason you're doing that. So I don't know. There are a lot of niche potential for the Sludge Belcher, and I feel like it's almost too good. But I mean, it's only comparable to the Fen Creeper. So yeah, it's a really, really good card. Really, really good card. Not necessarily a powerhouse, but definitely solid. I mean, after the Spectral Knight, it's very hard to call the Sludge Belcher a powerhouse, but it is definitely solid. So yeah, that's pretty much it for these cards. There will be another video about the legendary cards that have been revealed. Those I will be talking about, and at the very end, I will be making some kind of a comeback to all the cards that have been revealed, and maybe just kind of talk about them a little bit, and maybe represent them in a cooler format. So that's pretty much it for this video, guys. I hope you enjoyed it, and until next time, take care of yourselves. May the fun, and the luck, and the Nax hype be with you.